So welcome to the Sports World with Patrick. I've got my guest here today, Tim Flynn, the head coach of the UAH club hockey team program. So Tim, first of all, I do want to thank you for coming to the podcast today. I do sort of have this question for you here. Sort of just give us a background to what got you into coaching and in general to the sport of hockey.
Sure. Yeah. I grew up in Massachusetts. Hockey was pretty big around there when I was a kid. Obviously, it's big everywhere now. But started played up through high school. Played club hockey at University of Tennessee, and just a friend of mine started coaching the club team at Tufts University shortly after we got out of college. I started helping him do that, and kind of realized it was something I enjoyed doing. When you're in that age, it's hard to kind of find out what you want to do or really know what you want to do. And that was really the first thing that I enjoyed going to work for, even though it wasn't really work. We were just kind of volunteering. But so I started sending out resumes to college programs, junior programs, anybody that had an opening, just looking for a entry level job, whatever. And UAH got back to me. They needed a volunteer assistant coach, which is, at hockey, college hockey, they don't have graduate assistants. That's not, I think that's something they're trying to get, but right now it's, all they have is the volunteer role. So, so I came down here to Huntsville, in 2010 and, as a volunteer assistant while I was getting a master's degree, and started coaching college hockey with, Chris Luongo was the head coach. Gavin Morgan was the assistant coach, and Mike Ward was the other assistant coach. Three great leaders, great role models, and really just introduced to kind of how the jump from going to club hockey to NCAA Division I hockey is a big jump in terms of organization, just everything, the level of play, how the programs run. So once I saw that, again, is something I wanted to continue to pursue. I learned a lot from them. There were a few coaching changes over my first 3 years there. And so, yeah, we did that for 3 years at UAH. And then my third year at UAH, the Kurt Kleinendorf was the coach, and he ended up taking a job with the Minnesota Wild's American League team in Iowa. And I went with him up there to be the video coach there. That was a great experience also. Learned a lot about pro hockey. And so after that, we just spent 2 years there. We had our first child, so kind of made more sense to move back down to Huntsville, try to get out of hockey for a little bit, find a more, a job where you're just more at home more really. So did that, coached junior hockey and youth hockey, and then that all kind of rolled into one last year at UAH where we met Patrik, and then another great. Just every stop's been great, and now there's no more NCAA team at UAH. There's a club program, and the guy who was coaching before me, Mike Quenville, who is an alumni, former coach at UAH as well. He had to move on, and they needed somebody to come in. So I'm very happy to be given the opportunity. And this is my fourth season, and it's been quite a ride. So that's a long way to say, kind of tell the story, but that's how I got here.
So like you mentioned, you were at UAH for a while there as a volunteer assistant coach, and then ended up going to Iowa. So I do have this one question. So because you've gotten to see all the different aspects of even in club hockey, you've had your fair share. So what is really your coaching philosophy, and how has it evolved over the years as you've learned more and more about the difference between club, NCAA, and then the AHL team?
Sure. Yeah, coaching philosophy, I guess the main components kind of stay the same. You're trying to have a good team in terms of a good culture. The guys are buy into what you're trying to do, play play the systems the right way, work hard on and off the ice, and just have that good team environment. Um, so that part of it kind of remains constant no matter what level you're coaching. I'm coaching my 10-year-old now. That's kind of what we're looking for from the kids in terms of their attitude and what they bring to the rink every time. Just a strong attitude, and then trying to accomplish team goals, not individual goals, right? In terms of on the ice, that kind of changes. Obviously, 10-year-olds are different. Club hockey players are different, even college and pro. You have kind of different on the ice philosophies. At UAH, my first 3 years, it was their first 3 years as an independent program. So they had gone from being in the CHA, kind of having teams like a mid-major type league where they were competitive. They won the league a few times. They won it the year before I got here, made the NCAA tournament, to going to an independent schedule, which meant we were playing a lot more Power Five schools, quote unquote Power Five schools, and we were no, we were underdogs. I would say the majority of the season. So you kind of take a much more structured approach to the game. Try to play discipline, limit mistakes. You're probably going to get outshot, but try to create opportunities and capitalize on the ones you do get. Um, and obviously the goal there is you're still trying to win games. You're trying to make your program attractive to potential recruits. The interesting thing in Iowa, I guess not interesting, it makes a lot of sense, but um, it was kind of new to me when I got there. Our primary goal was not necessarily to win; it was to make sure that the players were getting better, that we were teaching them the system that Minnesota uses, so that if and when they got a chance to go play in Minnesota, they were ready and they could just jump right in and help Minnesota win games in the NHL. So, I mean, we were trying to win, but that wasn't necessarily the goal of every practice. Wasn't necessarily to put in our game plan how we would win a game on the weekend. We were trying to make sure the American League players were ready for the NHL when they got up there. So I did find that kind of interesting, but like I said, does, if you think about it, make a lot of sense. And then yeah, club hockey is just it's serious. Our program right now is it's a student run program. So we're really trying to kind of let the kids learn how everything needs to run. But again, the same principles apply. We're trying to have good attitude, good buy-in, a good team off the ice, and usually that helps have a better team on the ice. And we have a group of guys that works very hard. So again, a long answer, but just a lot of different experiences.
So I do know that you guys sort of, you guys have practices on certain days, and I know with it being a student run program, there's probably those very few days that you guys get to practice there in Huntsville. So I do have a question about this also,
Sure.
is how do you balance the skill development with game strategy during practices? So how do you sort of,
Yeah, that's
I
a
guess,
good
get them ready
question
for
because we are, like you said, it's not even when the NCAA, when we had it, we were practicing every day. And then if we were traveling, we would travel and practice on the road. But here we practice once, maybe twice a week right now. And that, um, it's a good problem to have. We would obviously like to skate more, but again, um, there's a lot of hockey in Huntsville across age, kids, adults, figure skating. So the rink's pretty full. It's more of a ice time availability issue, but we're working on that. They're talking about adding a third sheet, but in terms of our practices, I would say at the beginning of the year, we're trying to work on mainly structure, systems, team type stuff, while, yeah, let's say like the balance at the beginning of the year is 80-20, just making sure that they understand their roles when they're on the ice. Once we feel kind of good about that, it kind of flips more to, I don't know, probably not 80-20 the other way, but maybe 60-40, 65, whatever, 65-35, to just kind of keeping the skills up, keeping conditioning up, and just trying to be ready. Again, practicing once a week is not going to get them ready to stay in shape and play throughout the year. So we do have an off ice program that they're doing to at the gym, just to make sure, because one skate a week doesn't get you ready to play 2 games. But yeah, I would say beginning of the year is mainly team stuff, system stuff, and then once you get comfortable with that, you just keep the skill level up and try to get them a little bit better every time.
And so I do, because of course, as you mentioned, it's a student run program at UAH at the moment since since they've disbanded the NCAA program. So in all of your years of coaching, how did you foster team chemistry among players? And then if you can also share an experience where you had to resolve a conflict on any of your teams that you've had.
Yeah. Um, yeah, the culture it's different with every group. Typically, at the college, at the NCAA and the pro level, um, you're a little more hands off. You're in there. You have a leadership group and the captains, and they're usually the older players in NCAA and even in pro, the veterans. You make sure you have a good group of them and that they're bought in and they're kind of your coaches in the locker room when it comes to building that stuff. You trust them to do a lot of that. Um, NCAA wise, there's obviously rules on what you can do, but team dinners, road trips, try and do some sort of a team building thing early on in the season. I think our guys went up to Nashville and did like a big captain's practice up there. Stayed the night, um, and then came back, and then that was kind of their basically get away from Huntsville for a weekend in the preseason, get to know each other. Um, it does just depend on the group, but I think for the most part we had good groups of guys, and they got along real well. There was never an issue there. And then in pro, it's the same thing. They have a little more free time. They're not going to class, but they're also just adults. So, but yeah, you typically lean on your captains, tell them kind of what you're trying to do, and then let them kind of handle that at those levels. Club hockey's a little different. I don't want to say they're not. It's not as committed because they are committed. It's just not. The schedule's just less than what it would be at the NCAA level. So we try to do the same things. It is a little harder, but we try to get together a little bit, do video just when we're on the road or even at home, just having fun, making sure it's not too serious until it needs to be, and just keep the attitudes up, keep everybody kind of in a good mood until it's time to go out and play. But it's not, yeah, again, even club level, I would say it's the captains and the older guys kind of run that part of it, but we're as coaches, we're always kind of aware of what's going on and they report back. So, and then a conflict, that's a tough one. I would say, it's kind of hard to think of one, but I would say typically most of the conflicts are just, you're dealing with very competitive people. Um, it's never a personal incident. It's always, heat of the moment. Why aren't we doing it this way? Or I've always done it this way. I think this would work better. Um, and again, that's kind of where that culture comes in. And, basically the message is generally the same. It's we got to trust the process. Um, occasionally you'll go back and look at video and say, yeah, we can adjust here. Like as a coach, you got to be able to take the criticism and the input from the players, and there's a point sometimes you need the player to buy in, but then sometimes you can always, we're trying to get better too, so there's changes we can make, but in the moment we got to do it the way that we talked about, and then if we need to change moving forward we can talk about that later. But that's kind of the general very vague answer to that type of situation.
And so I do want to ask you because I've asked I had another coach that I was interviewing for a minute there on or for the podcast, and so what what role do you think communication plays in being part of a successful team? I've heard where um, one of the other coaches that I've talked to said it's it's better for it to be not that a coach is yelling or screaming at somebody, but or at a certain player, and they send messages a certain way. Um, so how much of that communication between coaches and players plays a huge role in a team being successful.
Yeah, communication is huge. I would say the majority of communication goes on at practices and in meetings leading up to games. During the games, the communication should probably already have happened. In terms of like if a player makes a mistake, they already know what they did wrong in a game. It shouldn't be new to them when you get into the game. Um, and there's just even at the highest level or the highest level I worked at, um, everybody kind of takes criticism and messaging different. And some people respond better to a coach that yells. Some people don't respond to that well at all. So you kind of have to know your team, know the best way to communicate with each player, um, and just kind of understand what's going to be in the best interest of the group. If it's a whole team meltdown and the whole team's not playing well, sometimes you gotta let them know it's not good enough and that we expect more. If it's a mistake on a system thing, it's unless it becomes a pattern, usually you just take the board, show them on the board, remind them what we practiced. And again, at club, it's a little the expectations, I don't want to say they're lower, but it's more understandable because we don't practice as often. You don't have the reps that you get at the other levels. So mistakes will happen, and you're just constantly trying to reinforce what we're trying to do. So
So I know, Tim, when we first met and got to meet each other, you were the director of hockey operations for the NCAA Division One program there in Huntsville. So how much of how much of the communication between the director of hockey operations and coaches also plays a role in a team being successful? Because I know you guys, I've seen some of the postings for the director of hockey operations. They also have to go out there and coach, or not coach, but they have to also go out there and recruit every so often, and they also have to be at games to take the video footage of their game and break down all that tape later on in the week. So how much of that also plays a big role in a team being successful?
yeah, no, I think all that is a big part. The video part is becoming bigger and bigger. It's like you said, we're taking during the game. We're cutting up video. We'll bring it down to the locker room between periods, show certain situations, usually goals or chances against that we, just were a result of us not doing what we had talked about doing earlier in the week. Areas we can improve quickly, um, and then again, preparing for a game. A lot of that's video based too. Um, so there's constant communication within the coaching staff, hockey operations staff about usually what I'll say is there's head coach kind of has the overall game plan, and then typically the two assistant coaches, one of them has like another role, whether it's power play, penalty kill, neutral zone, um, and then usually one's on the forward side of the bench, one's on the defenseman side of the bench. So they each have their own roles in that, and they're communicating with their small group. The head coach is communicating with the larger group, and it always the hard part of that is it has to be the same message. You can't be hearing one thing from the head coach, then here's another thing from your defensive coach or power play coach. So everything's got to kind of be unified and just different ways of getting across the same message. But yeah, it's like you said, you're there cutting up video all week during the game, and that you know, the communication between the staff will be certain things they want to look for. You know, if you've played a team before, maybe you're more familiar with what they're going to do. So you want to isolate certain areas and work on that. But if it's a new team that you haven't seen as much, you probably want to get a big picture first and then narrow down from there. So it's, yeah, there's communication on all levels, and it goes, the better the communication, usually the better the team plays.
Yeah, and so sort of reverting back because you have had a lot of players that you've worked with and you've developed, and so first of all, how important is the mental toughness in hockey, and how do you help players develop it? And then on top of that, how do you approach player development for all the different skill levels that you've coached, particularly?
Sure. Yeah, mental toughness is, I would say, one of the more important intangible pieces. It's kind of hard to teach. The only real way to teach it is the the player, the person has to kind of go through a rough patch where some things don't go their way. Um, I don't. I know back in the old days, people are kind of getting in trouble for it now. There are some coaches, or at least stories that we've all heard, where coaches kind of tried to manufacture that and create that mental toughness just by being very hard on players. I think that trend's kind of gone the other way, which is probably a good thing for long term mental health. But uh, yeah, it's not really something you can teach other than to just be. I mean, in my opinion, at least, you can be an outlet for when the player is having that tough time, that they know they can come and um, talk to you. They can watch video. You can kind of point out, like, you, in my opinion, there's no real need to pile on when they already know they're down, right? You want to kind of show them some positive clips of things they've done well, like, hey, everybody goes through slumps, you get out of it, you're capable of playing at this level type thing, and just kind of get them back on board. Now that doesn't always mean like they're going to get everything they want if they're not playing well. If they're going through that time, there are times where you have to sit a guy out, and but it's just having, like, it goes back to that communication, making sure they understand why they're sitting out, what to do while they're sitting out. Don't just sit there and pout about it. Watch the game, watch the areas you're struggling with, use that to get better. Um, put some extra time in on the ice, like watch video, but it's not. It's hard to teach. It's just kind of more, you're more guiding through, trying to help them come out the other side as best you can. But sometimes it's really up to the player to do that, and you're just there to kind of be helpful along that way, or along that journey. Um, yeah, the skill development at each level, I guess, is just, it's very different. You kind of, well, I shouldn't say very different, but obviously youth hockey, you're working on more fundamentals. When you get into college club, there's still probably a little bit of fundamentals, um, and then there's also, a lot of these kids that play club hockey are coming from, you have a wide variety of where they've come from, and what they've learned up to that point about. So you're kind of teaching a little more concepts. Um, you're probably having to teach systems over again, because a lot of them haven't really played at a level where there's full, like, as much structure as at least I'm used to. And then when you get to NCAA and pro, um, you're always, it's, I don't know. It's funny to me. A lot of people probably think that the pro hockey players have it easy, but if you watch how hard those guys work on the ice after practice, they're always working on something, whether it's taking extra face offs or just handling the puck, doing little things in the corner to get better. You're always working on something. The guys that stop working on their skills usually don't get to play very long. So, um,
Um,
yeah,
oh, sorry.
go ahead. No, it's fine.
So I do also have this. So we're sort of going to get into the game strategy and analysis of a game. So, um, when we were at UAH, we always had a pre scout
Yep.
spreadsheet sort of that we got used to and utilized that to give to the players. I remember that. So how beyond just that, how do you prepare for specific opponents, and then on top of that, you know, how do you analyze game performance and use the analytical side and data for improvement? Because I know there's a lot of people who are like, well, you have to be more data centered in order to get better, or you have to be more, in game performance. Because it, I'm seeing it more and more often where everybody's like, well, the analytics speak for themselves. That's what you got to go based off of, and not the other ones.
Yeah, that's. I'll be honest. Fortunately, I kind of got out of. By the time we finished that UAH season, I'd say that was kind of my last like competitive season of hockey up until the club. But we don't get that type of data at club hockey, so there's not really for what I'm doing now, club hockey. A lot of the games are online. You can find them, so we'll watch the games. Our pre-scout will basically just be this is what their lines are, what our opponent's lines were last game. These are kind of their leading scorers, and we'll, as coaches, just try to put whatever line matchups we think are best out against their team, out against what we expect their lineup to be. And then we'll look at their power play and penalty kill, and maybe a couple if they do anything off a face off. We'll try to watch that, but it's not as intense, or we don't dedicate as much time to it at club as we did at UAH, just strictly because it's. I don't want to say it, but it's I also have a full time job that I do. I don't have as much time to dedicate to it as I used to. But so for club hockey, that's kind of our pre scout. We don't really have like a template or anything. We just kind of talk about it in the room before the game, and then if occasionally at practice, if there's a face off play or something, we'll go over that, and then we'll go over our power play. But um, yeah, college and pro, it was very very detailed. The analytics weren't as heavy then as they are now. We did what I think a lot of teams still do, um, and did back then was just kind of we would go through usually we'd look at their last three games. In pro and hockey, usually you look at the weekend before, so their last two games, and then any times that we'd played them recently, if that was relevant. And you'd same thing. You'd chart their lines. You would have like a printed out pre-scout of all their systems, what they do, who their leading scorers are, and you would just kind of post that in the locker room on game day. We would have video meetings, basically of every situation. Um, we would do that. Pro hockey, we'd do that usually the morning of the game at morning skate. In college, either the day before at practice or the morning of, and you would really just go over every single what their tendencies are 5-on-5 in the neutral zone, off every face off in every zone, win or loss. It would be quick. It sounds like a lot. The meeting would be quick, but it would just kind of be showing their clips, and then this is what we would do when they do this. And at kind of like practice as the season goes on, there's only so many options off. Every team kind of runs something similar to each other. So explaining our responsibilities, it gets a lot faster and a lot easier because we've seen something like that before. So we already know how to respond to it. But yeah, it's at the NCAA and the pro level, the pre-scout is very intense, and that goes into that communication and just preparation for games. So
And then so I know at UAH, obviously you were there past the Ross era, as so was I. So what was the most challenging season as a coach? You know, from really from when you came to UH or even before that, at the club level and then to now as a coach.
Yeah, I mean I would say every season has its challenges. For the program, I know that first season I was there 2010-11, um, that was probably the it was hard because it was their first year as an independent. Um, you'd graduated, Cam Talbot had signed, so you lost obviously an NHL goalie. Um, and uh, kind of what we talked about, we always had great group of kids and we had good players. But we were playing teams quite often that, you know, we were no longer playing in that CHA where we were more equal to the teams in that league than now. I mean, our first weekend was at Wisconsin. They had a really good team. So I mean that year, maybe it's just because it was my first year and we didn't win a lot of games. Um, but that I know that was challenging for everybody because it's frustrating, and we also played a lot of close games that we like. I remember, I think we played Robert Morris at home, and they scored on like a goal that shot from the blue line that we blocked that literally went like 30 feet in the air and just landed behind our goalie and went in. We lost by a goal. Like it just, I think we felt like we played better. We deserved better outcomes some nights based on how we played than what we got. Um, so but you know, that year was tough, and honestly, all 3 years as an independent were difficult because every year kind of gets you a little further away from being in a conference and having that stability that recruits are looking for. Yeah. So and then I mean that yeah, man. Now that I think about it, I've been around a lot of teams that haven't done very well, but in Iowa it was difficult because your goal is obviously for players to move up and get called up. And I remember like my first year, we were playing pretty well up through almost into December, um, and then we lost. We didn't lose. They got called up. It was great for them. Eric Holla, Jason Zucker, and Darcy Kemper all got called up, and they didn't really come back down. So you lose three guys that are all still playing in the NHL. Seven, like they're very good players. It's hard to replace those. So as a team, we didn't do well, but that, like I said, that was kind of our priority, and those guys clearly were able to help Minnesota. So that part was good, but obviously losing is not fun in Iowa. So it's a hard balance there. And then club hockey is just a challenge because it's not a challenge. The challenge of club hockey is trying to get everything out of our players, just because we don't have the time, we don't have as much opportunity to practice and to prepare as we would like, um, or as we probably need. So that part's hard because it's hard to really hold them accountable on the ice during games when we don't really have enough time to teach it to them during the week. So, um, yeah, there's challenges everywhere, I guess.
And so, you know, you've been coaching for a while now here. So what are really the misconceptions that people have about coaching hockey? Because I know people are like, well, this is so easy to coach, and I've gotten to see both the outside and the inside of coaching and what all goes on behind the scenes for a hockey team, and it just seems very very challenging from the beginning of the season to the off season.
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest one is that it's easy. It's not easy, um, and shouldn't be easy. Like the people that are coaching, and like you said, once you get to see it from the inside, you do see how much there is to it, how hard it is. Even when you have, good teams or good players, or there's always players are always trying to get better, coaches are always trying to get better. So, and it's difficult just from a schedule standpoint. And then um, yeah, like you said, the off season part. A lot of times it really isn't an off season. You're always out doing something team wise. So I would say that how easy it is, and then how like time off wise or off season wise. I guess those are probably the two biggest ones. I'm trying to think of another one. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think I also think listening, you listen to radio or podcasts or read articles on the internet, like uh, people think that there's just an answer for every problem, and sometimes it's not. You can change things, you can adjust. Sometimes you're better sticking to your guns and just playing through it. There's no, if you do X, you get Y. Like there is a lot of variables and nuance to the outcome, and um, so I guess that part, and then the like, coaches get a lot of blame for things that really like, I guess based on that there is no exact right answer, right? Like you got to get a little lucky sometimes. You got to just kind of hope that things go the right way. Even, you can, like I said, we block a shot, the puck goes 30 feet in the air and lands in the net. Like we did everything we tried to do, everything we taught the players to do, and sometimes it just doesn't. And the players did everything they were taught to do, and sometimes it just doesn't work out how you want it to. It's one of those. So
Yeah. And then so now to talk about a little bit about the future of the sport. So what changes do you see coming in the future to hockey, and then definitely on the NCAA Division One side, because we did see American International College is now going to drop their Division One program and going to go to Division Two. And then do you think this new era of revenue sharing is going to change everything that we now know and make it harder for schools that have an ACHA team or I think it's an AHA is where UAH plays, I believe, at the moment. From really becoming an NCAA Division One program at this moment.
yeah, that's interesting. I know they just I didn't know AIC was dropping down to Division Two, but I think, yeah, I think honestly across a lot of sports, the way the NIL stuff and now that I think there's like, didn't they just pass something where they're just getting straight up paid by the schools as well?
Yeah, yeah. So they're gonna have it's a revenue sharing or profit sharing
Yeah,
of some
yeah.
type, and
So
then yeah,
I mean, I think that's gonna make it very hard for smaller schools to compete and get recruits at the level they will need um, to be as competitive as they want to be. There may be some schools like North Dakota, Denver. They're not necessarily big schools, but from a hockey standpoint, that's basically their football, right? That's where the majority of their resources go. So they may still be okay. It's probably going to be hard to grow. But I don't think that's just exclusive to hockey. I think that's kind of across all sports. Yeah, it's interesting with the NCAA kind of losing every lawsuit. I know they just announced like the CHL players are now eligible to play NCAA, so I'm not really sure how that's going to impact the landscape of junior hockey and then how they flow down to college. Um, yeah, there's a lot going on right now. It's interesting. From that from that side of it, there's definitely a lot to be figured out, and I know that they're working through it, but I think there's going to be a lot of loopholes probably in the next year or two that schools are able to find to make work in their favor. But on the ice, the game keeps getting faster. Um, there's less contact, so there's a lot more skill, and that's being taught at younger ages, and it's fun to watch. Um, but typically the game goes in cycles. Like you went through an era where the big physical teams were the teams that won, and then it went to smaller and faster and more skilled. And I think right now we're kind of, I don't know if we're not all the way back by any means, but we're at the point where it might be turning back to a little bit of more tougher hockey. So I'm just curious to see how that cycle goes in the NHL. But yeah, there's now is a lot of change going on, and it'll be interesting to see how the dust settles and what comes out of it.
Well, yeah, because I know the schools that do. So the schools will have an option to opt into the profit sharing, but if they do, they're going to have roster limits rather than having scholarships. Because I know they're getting rid of the national letter of intent
Oh, that's right.
now. So now the last thing that I've seen was hockey was going to be capped at 26 scholarships. So because of how many programs they were having, so
So
that's going to be
26,
very
26 scholarships
yes, or they call them
or
roster
20,
spots, right?
26 roster spots, no scholarships, just revenue sharing. Is
Yeah,
that okay? Because I know it was 18 was the max scholarship. Yeah, that. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I think this might be another rich get richer situation, unfortunately. But I don't know. We can hold our breath and hold out hope that there's enough for everybody to at least stay where they're at. I'd hate to see teams go away, like more teams go away. So
yeah. And so, what do you think are initiatives that the sport needs to take in order to keep growing it, whether it's in the southern markets or it's in general in the United States?
that's a good question too. I having young kids now, just the access to hockey is definitely way more than it was, and I think that the USA Hockey and those, Hockey Canada, those bodies that need to find a way to make it. I know it's. I know this is. I'm not the first person to say it, but is that it's just it's a very expensive sport to play. Like before you even get into what it costs to play on a team, even my 10-year-old, they got sticks at the store for like $200 for a 10-year-old stick. Like, and I know that's every sport. Like, so it's just the barrier to entry is big for a lot of people, and it's hard to even get them in the door. Now that being said, they have come a long way since I was a kid. They've definitely have focused on that, and it is improving. Um, but that I think that's always just going to be the hardest thing is to you know it's not like you can just go in the backyard and play wiffle ball or go down the street and shoot hoops. Like you can play street hockey, but that doesn't necessarily translate into ice hockey. You got to get to a rink, you got to have the gear, and then you got to have the time. And yeah, it's just keeping it available, trying to make it as available to as many people as possible for as little a cost as possible, at least initially to start. I think is where they have to continue to focus on. So
And then, how do you think that technology is going to be impacting coaching in the future, and then player performance also at the whether it's college or at the pro level?
that's yeah. I don't know how much more you can do coaching wise. I'm sure there's more. I just don't know. They have the iPads on the bench. I mean, unless they can start putting like iPads or screens in the little visors that they wear, so that guys can just watch it in their helmet while they're sitting on the bench. I from a coaching standpoint, I would. I'm assuming there will be more data points and more information that they get, and it's really just about making sure using that information figuring out what's worth your time and what's not, and what information is important and will help you. Um, but from a player standpoint, I think most of the stuff you'll see is probably related to their training and their off ice stuff. That department's advancing rapidly, and there's um, in terms of strength and conditioning. So I would say that's probably an area that's going to keep growing, and you're going to see bigger, stronger, faster, just like we have. So,
All right. Well, thank you, Tim, for coming on to the podcast. Thank you for your input on definitely on the sport of hockey here and showing us the knowledge that you do have for the sport. So once again, thank you for coming on the podcast.
of course, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Good to
You
see you.
too.
Take
Good
care,
to see
Pat.
you. Bye.